The prairie stretched like an ocean of gold and dust, breathing under a wide, unforgiving sky. In the distance, a single rider moved small against the vastness, shadowed by the dying light of the sun. The wind dragged long fingers across the land, kicking up memories and silence. They called him Ellis McCade. He hadn't spoken to another soul in nearly 4 years. He lived alone, miles from the nearest town, in a weathered cabin his own hands had built. A place of timber, grit, and grief, surrounded by barbed wire fences and ghosts he never buried deep enough. At sunrise, he'd ride the fence line. By noon, he'd fix whatever the wind broke. Come nightfall, he'd sit on his porch with a rifle across his lap and listen to coyotes, to the creak of the trees, to the silence that came after a family's gone. Inside, the cabin was spare. One rifle above the door, a blackened skillet on the stove, a single photograph on the mantel, his wife, Clara, and their boy, Thomas, smiling in a way that made Ellis feel both stronger and broken at once. They died the same winter. A sickness rolled through the valley like a whisper, took them both within days. By the time help came from Fort Lincoln, the grave behind the cottonwood was already frozen over. Ellis hadn't left the ranch since, not because he couldn't, because there was nothing left to find. That year, the war with the tribes had cooled, but the land still burned. Settlers crept west, carving fences through buffalo trails. The Apaches, driven from sacred ground, scattered into the canyons and mountains, clinging to what was theirs in name only. Ellis didn't take sides, not anymore. He figured blood was blood no matter who spilled it, but the past had a way of riding back up the trail. That evening, as a winter wind rolled in from the north, Ellis noticed the horses acting strange, not spooked, exactly, but unsettled. The kind of quiet that animals fall into right before a storm, or strangers. He stepped out of the barn, wiping sweat from his brow, squinting at the horizon. Then he saw them, 10 riders, dark against the sunset. Motionless silhouettes on the rise. They sat on horseback like statues. No movement, no banners, no shouts. But Ellis knew. Apache. He didn't reach for his rifle, not yet. He just stood still, letting the cold settle into his bones as the distance between them stayed fixed like a dare. Minutes passed. Neither side moved. Then, without a word, the riders turned and vanished into the brush beyond the ridge. Ellis didn't sleep that night. The fire burned low inside the cabin as he sat at the table, the old photo resting under his fingers. He whispered into the quiet. Tommy would have been 12. The next day passed in silence. Ellis checked the cattle, mended the corral, watched the tree line with a wary eye. He tried to forget the riders, but the wind kept turning. That night, he heard footsteps on the porch. Slow, heavy, intentional. He rose from his chair, a rifle in hand, and opened the door. There they stood, the same 10. Closer now, and different. Not warriors this time, but weary. A woman held a baby wrapped in faded cloths. One man had a bloodied arm. A boy leaned on a cane, face pale with fever. At their front stood the tall one from before. Stern, proud, quiet. He said nothing. Ellis looked at them, looked into their eyes, saw hunger, cold, and something else. Hope. He didn't speak either, just stepped aside. The tall man gave a single nod and motioned to the others one by one. They filed into the barn, moving slow, like ghosts made of muscle and dust. Ellis closed the door. Outside, the wind howled across the plains. Inside, for the first time in years, the silence wasn't his alone. The wind carried the chill of old bones that morning. Not just the season, but something else. The kind of cold that came when change rode in unnoticed and stayed. Ellis stepped out of the cabin before sunrise. The Apache group still slept in the barn, bundled in old hides and faded blankets. He saw their breath in the air, thin clouds, rising from mouths too tired to dream. A woman stirred, pulled her child closer. No words, no cries, just the quiet shuffle of survival. The fence line needed checking. A storm had knocked it halfway down in the night. He saddled his horse without hurry, but the unease in his hands betrayed him. Something about having others here breathing his air, warming themselves by his fire, unsettled a man who'd learned to live without. Still, he worked. By the time the sun rose, he was deep in mud and wire. A calf had wandered loose and died. In the night, its body stiff, eyes glazed. He pulled it to the side, covered it with brush. Not much else he could do. The land had never cared for sentiment. When he returned, the boy with the limp was coughing, wet, hard coughs, the kind that rattled a chest and left blood in a hand. Ellis stood in the doorway, watching the mother tend to him. Her face was tired, carved with lines of worry. The boy gasped once, shivered, and looked at Ellis with something like furor trust. He couldn't tell which. He reached into the cupboard and pulled down the pouch of dried herbs. Juniper, willow bark, things Clara used to gather from the hills. He knelt beside the boy and dropped the herbs into boiling water. Didn't say a word. Later, the boy slept, wrapped tight in fur and sweat. His breathing slowed. The mother bowed her head. Ellis didn't understand the words she whispered, but he felt them. He stepped outside, lit a pipe, and stared into the wide sky. And that's when he saw the tracks near the edge of the creek, bed-deep bootprints. Not moccasins, not barefoot. These were thick-soled, hard-walking and fresh. 3 sets, maybe 4, one dragging slightly a limp. He crouched low, touched the dirt, frowned. Kohana appeared at his side, without a sound. Ellis didn't startle, just looked at him. You see this? Kohana studied the prints, pressed 2 fingers into the mud, then stood. Men, he said simply, not yours. Ellis narrowed his eyes. No, not mine. They rode together that afternoon, trailing the prints as far as they dared, didn't speak much. The land between them did most of the talking. Dead grass, burned brush, an old campfire, long cold, bones of rabbits, picked clean, but no sign of the men. That evening, as they rode back, the sky cracked open with thunder. Rain fell hard and fast, turning the trail into soup. They reached the ranch soaked and silent. The others had made small shelter under the eaves of the barn. The children huddled near a fire. The old man, the one with the gray beard, sang something, low and deep. Kohana sat beside them, knife in hand, sharpening slow. Ellis stepped inside his cabin. The fire was still burning. He stared at the photo again. Clara's smile, Tommy's hand, on his shoulder, his own face so much younger. He poured a drink and sat in the dark. He remembered that winter, the night the fever hit. Tommy couldn't breathe. Clara coughed blood. Ellis built the fire higher. Hot it wasn't enough. He buried them before the snow finished falling. Never spoke a word since, but now, in the barn, a boy was breathing easier. A mother slept with her child safe against her chest. And for the first time in 4 years, someone had left a gift on his table. A small pouch, woven of horsehair and beads. Inside roots, herbs, cedar bark. A gesture, not payment. Recognition. Clutched it tight. The next morning, he walked out to the fence line again and stopped. Tied to a fence post was a broken feather, red with a rawhide string. An old sign. A warning someone had marked this land. He rode fast back to the cabin. Met him halfway. They're close, Ellis said. Kohana nodded. They watch. We stay here, they'll come. Kohana's gaze drifted to the barn. They know. They sat by the fire again that night. Neither man spoke for a long time. Ellis finally said, you don't ask for much. Kohana didn't. Look at him. We ask to live. The flames flickered between them. Shadows danced on the walls outside. The rain had stopped. The prairie held its breath. Ellis leaned forward, tossing a fresh log on the fire. You all right with dying on my land? Kohana's eyes didn't blink. Better than dying alone. Ellis stared at the fire, jaw clenched, heart pounding. Then we make a stand. And in the flicker of firelight, something unspoken passed between them. Not friendship, not yet, but the beginning of it. The wind had shifted, not just the weather but the feeling in the air. The calm before something broke. The following morning, Ellis found the Apache boy, the one who limped, coughing blood behind the barn. The woman the boys muttered forward, pressing cloth to his lips, her face drawn with fear. Ellis didn't wait. He fetched the herbs Kohana had left inside the pouch and knelt beside the child. He didn't know the right words, but his hands remembered how to care. Inside the cabin, the boy rested. Ellis lit a fire, let the steam from the boiling herbs fill the room. Kohana stood in the doorway, watching. Silent. Ellis finally looked up. He'll live. If the fever don't take him. Kohana stepped forward. For the first time, he set down his bow. Then he did something unexpected. He placed a single beaded necklace on the mantel, an offering, a gesture, not payment. Recognition. Later that night, Ellis sat outside the barn sharpening a hatchet when the first howl echoed from the ridge. Coyotes, but close, restless. From the dark, a voice came low and steady. You feel it, don't you? It was Kohana. Ellis nodded. Something's cumin. They didn't say more, didn't need to, in the language of men shaped by loss and land. Silence said plenty. The next day, smoke appeared on the horizon. Not from Ellis's ranch, from the direction of Hollow Pass, a known trail, a trader's route, and where Ellis had last seen those tracks. He and Kohana rode out again. A day's ride. Neither man spoke. The land between them said enough. What they found was worse than Ellis expected. 3 wagons, burned, horses gone, 2 men dead, scalped, but not by Apaches. It was staged. Ellis knew the signs. Settlers will think it was your people, he said, scanning the wreckage. Kohana crouched near the bloodied wheel. They want war, he muttered. Ellis looked at him, startled. It was the first time Kohana had used a full sentence around him that night. Around the fire back at the ranch, the truth finally came. The Apaches weren't just seeking shelter from the cold. They were survivors displaced from their land up north. A raiding party had slaughtered their kin weeks earlier. Some of the men Ellis now feared were the same ones who burned Apache camps and blamed the tribes in turn. They hunt us, said simply, as if naming a law of nature. Ellis sat in silence. The fire between them cracked, popped, hissed. I ain't no saint, Ellis muttered. I kept quiet while men carved this land up. Pushed you people out. Never raised a hand either way, Kohana replied without heat. But you opened. Ellis didn't respond. He took a long drink, then leaned forward. More riders will come soon. This valley won't stay quiet. Kohana didn't argue. He simply said, then we must decide who we are. That night, Ellis loaded his old Colt. He hadn't touched it in years. not since the fever took his family. Dust still clung to the handle, but the cylinders spun smooth. Outside, the Apache boy, the one who'd been coughing, ran without limping. The mother smiled as he passed Ellis. The tiniest nod of thanks. Inside the barn, Kohana laid out a map, a crude one, carved into animal hide. He pointed to the north ridge, a narrow path, defensible. We move them at dawn, he said. Ellis hesitated. Kohana looked at him, no expression, no persuasion, just calm truth. You know this land. We do not survive without you. The word "we" landed heavy in Ellis's chest. He stood slowly, looked around at the tired eyes, the soft breaths of sleeping children, the faint smell of cedar and smoke, and he made the choice at dawn. Ellis rode to the ridge with Kohana. They checked the pass, cleared brush, positioned rocks for defense. It wasn't much, but it would slow any rider. By noon, the group moved out, 10 Apaches and 1 old rancher, riding quiet, heads low, eyes sharp. They camped that night halfway up the ridge. Ellis stood guard. When he looked out over the valley, it didn't feel like his anymore. And maybe that was the point. Land didn't belong to men. Men belonged to it. And right now, this land called for a reckoning. He didn't say it out loud, but deep inside, he knew he was no longer alone. And when the riders came, they'd find a man no longer running from ghosts, but standing with the living. The first shot rang out just after sunrise. It echoed across the ridge like a thunderclap, bouncing between the rocks, startling the horses and waking the camp in an instant. Ellis had been awake, sitting near the fire with his rifle resting across his knees. The others stirred fast. Apache warriors moved like shadows, silent and sharp, forming a loose perimeter. Kohana appeared beside him without a word. His eyes locked on the trees below the slope. More shots, closer now. Then they saw them fall. Riders at first, approaching from the lower trail. Not settlers, not cavalry. These were the kind of men Ellis had always known existed on the edges of every frontier. Raiders, ex-soldiers, bounty hunters chasing ghosts or gold. One rode with a limp. Ellis spat. Same tracks we saw near the creek. Kohana nodded once. They come to finish what they started. Ellis stood, cocked the hammer on his rifle. Then let's not make it easy. The women and children were moved behind a rock outcrop higher up the trail. One boy carried the baby on his back, his face pale but steady. Kohana signaled with 2 fingers, then faded into the trees like mist. Ellis took position just below the bluff, behind an old cedar stump. He'd marked this spot 2 days earlier. Range was clean. Wind was low. His pulse was steady in a way it hadn't been in years. The riders climbed fast, confident, reckless. The first one fell before he saw the flash. Ellis's shot caught him center chest. He tumbled from his horse and didn't get up. The others scattered, shouting, ducking behind boulders. One fired wildly uphill, the crack of his revolver tearing through the air. But then an arrow flew fast, clean. It hit its mark. Kohana, not a sound from him, just deadly precision. The second man fell sideways, gurgling in the dirt. Chaos erupted. The third bandit charged uphill, yelling curses, gun blazing. Ellis rolled from cover, took a second shot, missed. Dirt exploded beside the man. Kohana lunged from behind a bush, tackled him, knife flashing once, twice. It was over in seconds. The last rider turned tail. Ellis shouted, "Let him go." But Kohana was already going into the trees, following silent. Ellis stood still, rifle at the ready, breathing like a bellows. He looked down at the blood on his hands. He hadn't meant to kill again. But something in him was awake, now not bloodlust, but purpose. When Kohana returned, he carried no trophies, just the bandit's rifle. "They won't come back," he said simply. Ellis didn't ask what that meant. He just nodded and followed him back to the camp. Later, as the fire crackled low, the Apache children sat close to their mothers. A soft chant rose in the background, a prayer, or maybe a morning song. Ellis sat apart, staring into the flames. Kohana joined him. "You protected us," Kohana said. "I owed no one," Ellis replied. "No," Kohana said, "but you chose." Ellis looked at the stars above the ridge. They felt clearer now, sharper against the sky. "I thought I'd buried my life with them," he said, voice trembling. "My boy, my wife, you carried them," Kohana replied. "Now you carry others too." The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was full of everything that had gone unsaid, everything that didn't need to be. Come morning, the Apache group prepared to move on north to a safer stretch of land that Kohana knew. The fever had passed. The children were stronger, and Ellis's cabin, it was no longer just his. They didn't ask him to come, but they waited. And when he finally walked up to them, saddlebag over his shoulder, rifle slung across his back, no one was surprised. Before he mounted, Ellis turned one last time to look at the cabin, the fence he had built, the grave under the old cottonwood, the life he had lost, and the one he had chosen to build again. He tipped his hat, then rode on. The prairie didn't care about bloodlines or borders. It only answered to those who listened, who endured, who bled and healed under its open sky. And for the first time in years, Ellis McCade wasn't alone. He was part of something greater than land. He was part of people again. VO final line. In the West, men don't always live to tell their story, but sometimes the land remembers for them. If this story moved you, share it. Comment below with your thoughts. What would you have done in Ellis's boots? And don't forget to subscribe to The Quiet Frontier for more true-hearted tales of survival, redemption, and the wild spirit of the West. Until next time, ride steady and listen to the wind.